Here is your latest African news. Your news highlights: Ethiopia. Tigray rebels ready to continue advancing in northern Ethiopia. Liberia. Liberia asks Oman to halt visas for domestic jobs. Kenya. Kenya court begins full hearing on poll petition. Horn of Africa. Khartoum summons Ethiopian ambassador after plane crash. South Africa. South Africa's Ramaphosa lashes xenophobic hospital protests. Diaspora. Venezuela, Colombia take steps towards normalizing ties. Ethiopia. Tigray rebels ready to continue advancing in northern Ethiopia. The rebels in Ethiopia's Tigray region say they are open to negotiations with the federal government but determined to continue advancing into northern Ethiopia as long as its military reinforcements continue to threaten their region. After a 5-month truce, fighting resumed on 24th August between the Federal Army and Tigrayan rebel troops who accuse each other of having triggered the hostilities. Journalists have no access to northern Ethiopia, making independent verification impossible. The mobile and internet networks are also unreliable and the situation on the ground is difficult to assess. In recent days, according to sources, the rebels have advanced about 50 kilometers south of the Tigray border into the neighboring Amhara region and southeast into the Afar region. Abiy's government has announced that federal forces had pulled back from the town of Kobo, while Getachew said a significant part of the North Wollo zone in Amhara was in rebel hands. In response to Getachew's comments, the government communication service said that the federal government is still committed to the peaceful resolution to the conflict that was once again initiated by the TPLF terrorist group. The renewed fighting shattered a truce announced in late March and has cast a shadow over efforts to try end the near 22-month conflict. The war has killed untold number of civilians and left millions in need of humanitarian aid, with Tigray itself without access to basic services and struggling with food and fuel shortages. Liberia. Liberia asks Oman to halt visas for domestic jobs. The Liberian government has requested authorities in the Arabian country of Oman to immediately halt the issuance of visas to Liberians seeking to travel to the country for domestic employment. The request comes after a group of women already in the country posted graphic images of sexual abuse and other forms of mistreatment they say they were going through in the hands of their so-called employers. In a virtual meeting, Liberia's Labour Minister Charles Gibson differed with officials of Oman's Global Affairs Department who had described some of the reports by the Liberian as unsubstantiated media claims. An Omani government official has said the request to halt visa issuance will be considered. Kenya. Kenya court begins a full hearing on poll petition. The Supreme Court of Kenya has begun hearing the presidential poll petition by Raila Odinga, who is challenging the result of the August 9th presidential election, which delivered victory to William Ruto. The 7-bench judges led by Martha Koome already have begun the pre-trials after 2 affidavits that were struck out. In the previous ruling, the judges ruled out Odinga's involvement in the chaos that happened at the National Tally Center at Bomas of Kenya when the chairperson of the Electoral Commission wanted to declare the president-elect. The 77-year-old veteran politician who was running for the 5th time in the presidential election and was backed by incumbent President Uhuru Kenyatta and his party lost the election by some 230,000 votes, 50.49% to 48.85%. In a statement to the court, Ruto said Odinga had in the past systematically challenged the result of the presidential elections and fomented national cries after losing. He accused the former Prime Minister of trying to try his luck again by forcing a new candidacy through judicial means. According to the 72-page petition, the Odinga camp claims that 140,000 ballots were not counted and that this significantly affects the final results insofar as none of the candidates reached the constitutional threshold of 50% plus 1 vote to win the election in the first round. The judges must rule out his appeal by September 5th. If they order the cancellation of the election, a new election must be held within 60 days. Horn of Africa. Khartoum summons Ethiopian ambassador after plane crash. The Sudanese foreign minister has summoned the Ethiopian ambassador, saying Ethiopia had shot down a plane from Sudanese airspace. On August 24th, the Ethiopian army announced that it had shot down a plane loaded with weapons destined for the rebels in Tigray North, which had violated Ethiopian airspace after flying over Sudan. At a press conference in Khartoum on August 29th on the resumption of hostilities in northern Ethiopia, Ethiopian ambassador Yibeltal Amero Alemu stated that there is no doubt that the news of the plane that flew over Sudanese airspace into Ethiopian airspace and was shot down by the Ethiopian army is true, but only happened for defense purposes. In a statement, the Sudanese foreign minister said the Ethiopian ambassador had been summoned, saying its Director General for African Affairs, Fadl Abdallah Fadl, had denounced baseless allegations. Ethiopia did not specify the origin of the aircraft or when it was shot down. Fighting resumed on August 24th between Tigrayan rebels and the Ethiopian Federal Army in border areas of Tigray. South Africa. South Africa's Ramaphosa lashes xenophobic hospital protests. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has condemned anti-immigrant protests that had prevented foreigners from accessing a hospital in the capital, fueling concerns about rising xenophobia. A new anti-immigration movement dubbed Operation Dudula, meaning pushback in Zulu, has been picketing Kalafong Hospital in Atteridgeville, a township west of Pretoria. Protesters have blocked patients on the basis of skin color and language, infringing on basic rights, the government said in a separate statement. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says acts of lawlessness directed at foreign nationals should not be tolerated. Ramaphosa maintained that South Africans were not xenophobic but quite welcoming. But he added that law enforcement and security forces were carrying out operations to deal with the issue of illegal migration. The protesters blame long waits and poor service in the public health sector on strains caused by an influx of foreign migrants. Their action follows a viral video of Provincial Health Minister Dr. Porphy Ramatuba berating a Zimbabwean patient, accusing her of seeking treatment at a government hospital at the expense of South Africans. Medical care at public hospitals in South Africa is free, but the costs are borne by payroll and other taxes. Diaspora. Venezuela, Colombia take steps towards normalizing ties. The governments of Venezuela and Colombia took a step towards normalizing ties when President Nicolas Maduro hosted an event to welcome the newly appointed ambassador from the neighboring country, a post that had been empty since 2019 over a diplomatic impasse. Colombian Ambassador Armando Benedetti met with Maduro a day after arriving in Venezuela. He was designated to the post by new President Gustavo Petro, who abandoned his conservative predecessor's opposition to Maduro and vowed to re-establish relations with his government. Maduro and Benedetti met at the Miraflores Palace in the capital, Caracas. Colombia, for decades the region's strongest ally of the United States, was among dozens of countries that withdrew recognition of Maduro as Venezuela's legitimate leader after his 2018 re-election, which they argued was fraudulent. Petro, Colombia's fast leftist president, and Maduro have expressed willingness to build a new stage of cooperation, including the reopening of border-crossing bridges to commercial traffic, the renewal of military collaboration to ease tensions in areas where armed groups operate, and the resumption of Colombian consular services in Venezuela. Maduro expelled all Colombian diplomats in February 2019. He maintains that former Colombian President Ivan for years promoted plans to topple his government. The Venezuelan government has estimated that the commercial exchange within a year of a fully reopened border could exceed $4 billion. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, follow, share, and like our video. It's the best way of supporting us. And remember, Africa is watching.